Well, hello, everyone. This is Dr. Snyder, and we're going to have some fun here in the next hour talking about various things that we all get to do in our practices as far as making, wonderful cosmetic creations for our patients. And I think, a lot of that is motivated and driven by us, wanting to do something different, each day with our hands and be artistic and creative. And at the same time, helping patients to feel better and more confident about themselves. But as we all know, they call it the practice of dentistry. Practice because, hey, we're all continuing to practice and improve upon ourselves. Let's face it, the day you finally conquer these things and get really good at your craft, well, that's probably the day you retire. So, with that being said, there's obviously mistakes that happen throughout our journey as dentists. And what we find is that these problems, these mistakes that occur, are actually things that teach us. We learn through problems. And so what I've always said is a problem is a gift, because if you have problems, you get to keep learning and improving. If you don't have problems, well, you're either playing it comfortable or you're not pushing yourself to, create and do more in your business or in your world. And so for tonight, we're going to talk about some costly mistakes that happen in adhesive dentistry when we're talking about ceramics. So with that being said, sit back, relax, and let's have a conversation. Now, with all my teaching over the last 30 years and, private one-on-one coaching, I hear a lot of different things. But what I would say I hear most is that dentists often lack confidence in their abilities, and they oftentimes feel overwhelmed due to all the different materials and techniques and how they continue to evolve and change, and how if you listen to every dentist out there, every dentist has kind of a different way of doing things, whether it be materials or techniques, but, everyone kind of has their own thing. And even when I was teaching at UCLA, running the graduate program in cosmetic dentistry, I would see dentists that are in private practice out on the clinical floors teaching dental students how to do things. Well, to some extent that were incorrect, but they said, that's what I do in my practice. And I said, well, that's great, but you can't teach students to do things the wrong way. But they're like, but that's what I do. And I said, I get that. But we can't be teaching students how to do things that aren't like direct out of manufacturer instructions or without research behind them. So unfortunately, there's a lot of things that go wrong simply because we as dentists, myself included, we oftentimes don't read, all the instructions and follow things to the letter. And so hence we find problems. And we either own those problems and recognize where we made a mistake, or we start searching for solutions and answers, or we tell ourselves that product doesn't work when in fact it was us, right? Now, it's hard to blame ourselves, but the sooner we can learn to blame ourselves and find a solution, the better off we can be. Now, I hear other dentists saying that, they're not confident with resin, that they don't feel that it can be, a consistent approach to treating teeth as far as having great adhesion all the time and not having sensitivity or micro leakage or debonding or failure, if we're talking about, ceramics. And I was like, wow, that's an interesting observation. And where does that come from? Well, each person has their own rationale or reasoning as to why they feel comfortable with doing anything. And so it's interesting to hear that there's still a lot of dentists that aren't comfortable with doing various types of adhesion to the tooth structure and to ceramics. And it's funny because when I watch certain things on social media, I can see errors and things when people are shooting videos of what they're doing. Granted, the public doesn't see it, but some of us as dentists will see things that maybe aren't being done correctly and might be setting someone up for failures or problems. But obviously in social media, heaven forbid you ever correct someone or say anything. So why do we have these problems? Well, I would say these technique issues simply come from a lack of training and understanding. And so because of that, we continue moving forward using the same things. And at some point we start to find failures and or problems. They're not always, immediately. Sometimes they take time. And I would say also, oftentimes it's not having enough repetitions. Depending on how often you do a full mouth rehabilitation or 10 or 20 veneers, if you're only doing those, once every couple of years, as opposed to every week or every other week, then obviously your repetitions don't allow you to have the comfort or the problems, let's say, that arise over time from learning to change maybe your technique or delve deeper into something that could be a potential problem. And that's obviously where you learn and train yourself to be different on the next case. Now, granted, we don't want to have failures and problems because A, that's bad for business, and B, that's bad for patients referring other people. And obviously, we want patients to have the best longevity possible out of whatever we're doing for them. So depending on how many repetitions you've done in various types of adhesion and ceramics, oftentimes we can have various fears and be scared of doing certain things. Like maybe, the day that you finally go to deliver a big case, you may have already done 10, 20, 40, whatever it is, but still have a fear or concern in the back of your mind, right? Now, if you listen to everyone else's problems, everyone has a different problem, you start to assume sometimes that you're going to have similar problems. We have these fears that creep up in our mind that oftentimes are unfounded. But if you're having problems, time and time again, then obviously that fear is a reality. So the reason I point this out is because oftentimes in dentistry, we think about delivering a product. And that's why we're here talking tonight, is we're talking about delivering. And yet what we don't talk about is all the repetitions that go into being able to deliver. So if you're not comfortable with doing something, is that because you haven't done enough of them yet? The same as like the first time you did a crown or silver filling or resin filling in dental school. I don't know if I ever got comfortable until I got out of school. The repetitions had to occur over and over again. But the only way you get to deliver something is if you know how to market and attract people, and then are good at communication to get them to understand and want to move forward with you. So attracting and converting are two very important things that if you can conquer those, which most people don't train on, then you finally get to deliver. And when you deliver, if you're delivering regularly, that repetition starts to occur such that you get comfortable. So that if you're doing cases every week, you're like, this is no big deal. It's no different than tying my shoes anymore. But if you're only doing one every 6 months to a year, then obviously you're going to have some concerns. So to become more successful, the biggest area that you need to consider spending more time on and learning about is A, how to get more cases and how to get them to move forward so you get the repetitions so that you can be doing more of what you'd like to be doing. But how often are you training on that? How often are you training on getting more patients for specific procedures? And how often are you training your mindset and your communication skill and your understanding of psychology and communication to get people to say yes and move forward? Because let's face it, in dentistry, we don't focus on that. We continue to focus on the latest technology and all the skills of providing different services. And yet we're missing out on the two most important aspects of running any type of business on this planet. It's not about just delivering the product. It's about running the business and the systems. And one of the biggest ones there is the marketing and the conversion. So in other words, the attracting and converting. So again, hard for us to look in the mirror and say, oh man, it's on me. I'm the one. I've got to change myself. I've got to go figure out more things or hire people and get them to do things that I want that will give me the results I'm looking for. Okay. So the most common mistake I would say for someone having errors or problems or not feeling comfortable with ceramics is repetition. And I think we could all agree that, okay, dental school, after I had done silver fillings in dental school and then went out on my own and eventually did enough of them, I got comfortable with all that repetition. I go, oh, no problem. I can make a contact tight every time. I can get the margins sealed. I can get it all like lined up as far as its shape and function before the amalgam hardens on me. All those things we all got to deal with. Right. So again, focusing on the wrong thing and not having repetitions is not creating success. All right. So for those of you that are new, if you're not familiar with who I am, I'm a dentist the same as the rest of you, graduated from UCLA back in '94, done a lot of things in business and dentistry, specifically cosmetics, as far as creating a graduate program, writing some books and numerous articles and research and lecturing around the world, as well as creating some different devices and things for the industry, both in dentistry and outside of dentistry. I love business. I love what we get to do. We get to play MacGyver every day. We get to build things, something that's different every day, day in and day out. So those repetitions can be quite similar, but yet are kind of different. All right. So in looking at that, let's think about this. If we're talking about indirect restorations, we think about margins, tissue management, and isolation. By now, you should have plenty of repetitions to go, oh, that's a no-brainer. And yet what's interesting is it doesn't matter if you have the latest technology. If you've got the latest scanner, the latest printer, whatever that is, doesn't make you any better. You still have to handle margins, tissue, and isolation. Because let's face it, whether you're using impression materials or taking videos, you still have to manage all these things. It's not that you suddenly got that much better by simply being able to take a digital video as compared to taking an impression. So if you couldn't take good impressions before, you might still have problems taking impressions with something digital. And the labs will say that. They say, if anything, there's more problems now than when people were taking impressions. And all lab owners will tell you impressions are horrible for most of us. Okay, so we're going to start there for a minute. Class of 2011, go Bruins. So in looking at this case, you go, okay, we got all kinds of stuff here. Now, in this case, obviously, we got implants, we got veneers, we've got crowns. And so in managing this, there's a number of ways you can go. There's not one right way to do anything, right? There's a number of different ways. But margins, based on your materials and your lab technician's skill set, you can place your margins supragingival, equigingival, or subgingival. Now, ideally, if we can keep them equigingival or supragingival, obviously it makes life easy, right? We don't have tissues in the way. We don't have fluids to contend with. Life is simple. Well, with modern ceramics, we can do this in a lot of our cases, unless someone wants some crazy opaque tooth and the root, is a totally different color. Then obviously it's going to stand out and you'll have to put your margin under the gum line. Okay, so if that's the case that we have to go under the gum line, obviously we can pack retraction cords, typically using the smallest cord possible at like a 000 or 00, right? Maybe you even want to use a 0. Those are a little bit larger. I typically don't use those, but nonetheless, we're placing something just to move the tissues up and out of the way, typically about a 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter when you place a retraction cord. Now, me personally, I don't put any chemicals in there unless I need them. So if the tissues are healthy and I'm gentle putting a little string in there, a little cord, then obviously I'm not going to create any bleeding or problems, right? But if you're heavy-handed, you may need to use other things, right? So obviously we can make provisionals on here. We can clean up excess. And ideally, if we're placing provisional materials and cleaning things up well, we're not causing trauma. At the same time, we're not leaving flash and excess that creates irritation and inflammation. That's going to make life difficult when it comes time to cement or adhere things to the tooth structure. Okay? So having good provisionals is part of the key to success. And placing those provisionals is determined partly by where we put our margins. So hence margin placement instantly is one of the most important things, and how we place that to create healthy tissues. Obviously, here's her final case. But if you're thinking of it in that sense, you go, okay, well, if I've got to adhere things and it's going to be a bleeding, bloody mess, my job is going to be difficult. Furthermore, if it's under the gum line and I've got circular fluids, my life is going to be difficult. So in looking at a case like this, we can see obviously margin placement becomes critical. In the case of colors, we're allowing translucent porcelains to blend into the tooth so that should they have recession, things still look natural. We don't have to hide things under the gum line anymore in most cases. But technique is what I'm pointing out. Technique is everything. Because if the patient has irritated, inflamed tissues or periodontal disease that you didn't address before doing the case, you're going to have a lot of problems, right? And so not only at preparation appointment, but at the delivery appointment, it might be a nightmare. So if you're irritating or damaging the tissues at the prep appointment, you need to make really good provisionals, and you're going to need to have some really good tools and techniques so that when you go to deliver, you can offset all of these problems that are arising from preparation technique or provisionals. Now, that may mean you need to use hemostatic agents, retraction cords, electrosurge, Compra caps, pace. There's a lot of stuff out on the market nowadays. And all of them can work in any given day. But technique is everything. And so we're going to talk about some of these techniques tonight. And so in looking at this picture, I just stole it off the internet because honestly, I don't have a picture like this. But you can see, obviously, if you're going to try and adhere things, this is going to be a nightmare. Good luck getting good isolation and adhesion. So understanding that, we go, okay, well, we have tools. What tools are we going to look at? Well, obviously, various types of hemostatic agents. Ultradent, I think, makes some phenomenal ones, but there's other ones out there. You can say, well, hey, Viscostat is a phenomenal hemostatic agent. It's a 20% ferric sulfate, and it'll stop, the aorta, cold in its tracks if you apply this. And so it'll work great for the case that we just saw, right? But everything has a potential drawback that we have to be aware of. Now, in the case of ferric sulfate, it's an iron-based system. that should you not rinse it out completely, if you leave just a tiny bit behind, that iron is going to oxidize. And in doing so, it's going to leave a black mark on the tooth, which is going to look like rust or bacteria. Okay. Now, understanding that, you probably need to have Viscostat Clear, which is a 25% aluminum chloride. This will not have the same type of effect. If you happen to leave some behind, the tooth will not discolor or change. So your cosmetics stay intact. Now, because technique is everything, again, I took some pictures off the internet. You can see, I don't know if these are provisionals or finals, you can see the discoloration that's happening under there, because they probably didn't isolate the tissues well enough, or they didn't control the bleeding well enough, or they used the wrong material such that they left behind the ferric sulfate, which oxidized, creating this black, horrible look. So if you ever see this under your provisionals or under your finals, this is where it's coming from. So again, instead of trying to use the same product in the front of the mouth and the back of the mouth, get a different product so you never have to deal with this again. Okay, so we'll talk about another way to treat it as well. Now, there was a research article that came out that was talking about the effect of contamination with hemostatic agents on the shear bond strength of composite to dentin. Now, they were using some adhesives you and I might not be using anymore, but nonetheless, it points out that resins, adhesive composites, and bonding agents, in trying to bond them to the dentin, that we know if you used a hemostatic agent, it can have an effect on the bond strength. Basically, it can reduce your bond strength if you're using an iron-based system. Okay. Now, if you're using the aluminum chloride, they found there was no statistically difference in utilizing that and leaving something behind. So again, makes sense to use that. Now, if you want to go back and read the particular article, you do get a handout from this program. And so you'll notice there's a hyperlink here at the bottom. If you have the PDF handout, you will be able to access that article and go read it quickly and easily. And I'll tell you how to get the handout at the end. All right, so tooth discoloration following exposure to hemostatic agents. Obviously, avoiding the use of ferric sulfate in the anterior dentition is ideal. Using aluminum chloride would be better. But if you are using ferric sulfate, don't use phosphoric acid with it, because that creates an even worse effect. And so what they found was obviously that, using aluminum chloride is better to avoid staining, but that if you did get staining, you can try and rinse things with a 10% EDA or EDTA or 2% chlorhexidine rinse after exposure to iron sulfate to help prevent this staining and hopefully remove that. You can also sandblast it. But obviously, these are a lot of extra steps, a lot of extra materials and things you have to do. We don't want to have to do more steps. We want to be clear and concise, get the job done. And so again, understanding all of this, use the aluminum chloride. Again, if you want to read the article, it's a great article. All right, so what's another way we could manage tissues? Well, many of you nowadays probably have lasers. And so here's an example. We have tissue in the way. Patient presented with a crown that was fractured, wanted a new crown. And I said, well, let's address the gum tissues here. Let's make a beautiful picture with a beautiful picture frame. And so they agreed. They're like, yeah, that would be great. We can actually make the tooth look more realistic and normal versus this kind of square appearance that it has. Now, granted, we're not going to go into, periodontal ligaments and, the biologic width and all that fun stuff. But nonetheless, this particular case allowed me to use a laser to remove tissue and still be far enough away from the bone that I don't get an inflammatory response. But nonetheless, having the right tool and having, experience with utilizing various types of lasers, we can remove tissues and create a nice dry environment in which to take an impression, and potentially have a nice dry environment also when we go to cement or adhere the final restoration. And should we not have good tissues or inflammation or bleeding, what have you, we can again grab a laser and very efficiently cauterize the area and stop the lymphatics from obviously releasing circular fluids, so we can have a dry, clean environment. Okay. Now, obviously, in this case, I put a provisional on, so we get a little irritation again from me making a provisional. But the whole goal of using a laser, instead of trying to rub chemicals in, is we're taking a laser to vaporize an area, meaning vaporizing tissues and wielding shut the capillaries and the lymphatic system. So we literally have a dry moat running around the outside of this tooth. So we can take an impression, whether it be optically or traditional, impression materials, or it could be the day of delivery that we're trying to shut everything down so we can cement something in a dry environment. Okay. Now, someone usually asks, lasers. Hey, there's a lot of different lasers out there, whether it's diodes or erbiums. There's a lot of different types. Some work better than others. This obviously isn't a laser program, but since someone always asks, I'm still using a dual wavelength diode laser, which is inexpensive and easy to operate, very forgiving. But nonetheless, this is from Ultradent. This is their Gemini. And so they do have a newer version, which is their Gemini X, I think it is. So nonetheless, it looks a little different. It's got a few more bells and whistles, but nonetheless, lots of great lasers from different companies, whether it's Ivoclar, Denmat, Dentsply, you name it. But someone always asks, so here's what I'm using. So obviously to recontour tissues instantly makes it look better, but also made the job a lot easier as far as managing tissues. So if we can put margins in a good place and we can manage tissues well and put good provisionals on there that mimic the tooth extremely well and are smooth and clean and hygienic, then we get to finally make a choice. And that choice is, how am I going to put things in? What am I going to use? Here's where we start to have failures and problems. It starts with those things that we might have thought were simple, but those set the tone for here. Because I'm going to make a decision on what type of materials I'm going to use. Am I going to use ceramics? Am I going to use zirconia? A lot of different options out there. And so to try and make it streamline with your decision process, I said, okay, ceramic on the left, zirconia on the right. Let's talk about how we're adhering and managing these particular materials with our resins and how they interact with the tooth and the ceramic and zirconia. All right. So if you have a ceramic protocol on the left and a zirconia protocol on the right, I tried to make it very systematic and simple because oftentimes we feel frustrated and overwhelmed with these things. So literally, I kept the same things on both sides and omitted certain things or added things. So let's go through this. Obviously, on the ceramic side, a ceramic restoration, whether it's feldspathic, lithium disilicate, lucite, whatever you're using that's traditional glass, right? You're going to check the etch from the lab, make sure it's been etched thoroughly and properly. Now, in the case of zirconia, we can't etch zirconia. So in that case, it's different right from the word go. Your lab should be sandblasting that for you. If you don't know, you should call and ask them. But that is a key difference there. Hence, I put the little red asterisk saying, okay, protocol is slightly different for each of these, but these protocols are simple. But having a systematic approach is what makes life easy. Hence, I'm trying to give this to you. From there, after checking the restoration, for ceramics, you've got to put a silane coupling agent on that ceramic after it's been etched. Okay. Now, in the case of zirconia, you can't use a silane. Silanes will not work on zirconia. So you notice I left that as kind of a ... So we're not putting that procedure in here. Okay. Now, the next part would be if I'm going to be trying in this ceramic or this zirconia, I've got to clean the tooth. You want to clean off the debris and provisional cement or whatever is there. So you have a nice smooth surface to try things in to make sure your margins fit. From there, obviously, you then, after trying things in, typically with a water-soluble try-in paste, after doing so, you're going to then have to take the ceramic back out after getting approval or checking occlusion and contacts. And on the left side, we have to clean the ceramic. Now, if we put a silane on, the beauty of a silane is it protects the ceramic. It's already adhered to the ceramic. So your ceramic is protected. It's not really contaminated. Okay. So in the case of your ceramic, you can literally just grab your air water syringe, and rinse it off. Makes it easy if you put the silane on ahead of time. Okay. Now, in the case of zirconia, if we tried it in, we know in trying it in that it's contaminated with saliva. And it will have an extremely low bond strength if we're using traditional resin chemistries. So we have to use a ceramic cleaner at that point. We can't just rinse it off. We have to use a cleaner. And it's at this point we have to add in a ceramic primer, which is different than a silane. Still just a bottle of liquid. You'd think it's very similar, totally different. Okay, so a ceramic primer goes on the zirconia after we've cleaned it. Now, jumping back to the left, I said cleaning the ceramic you can do with water, but I did put with an asterisk ceramic cleaner. Could you use the same product that we use on zirconia to clean your ceramics? Yes, you can. To some extent, it might be overkill, but if you want to, like me, I'm very specific of trying to make everything perfect. I have no problem using it and spending an extra couple pennies to clean it with a nice ceramic cleaner. Okay. But I point that out is why you have some variables there. So in jumping into ceramics, you can see the top ceramic protocol, checking the etch on the inside, right, which you can't etch zirconia. So we're looking here, we're saying, okay, you can see a frosty etch, and I specifically made a place that wasn't etched, so you can see there's a significant difference in its appearance. Now, the place you want to check is along your margins. That's the most important part to seal things shut. Okay, so this is critical for allowing ceramics to truly be bonded to things. If you're not doing this part well, or you're not checking it, then you're potentially going to have some leakage or debonding. We don't want that to happen. Okay, for the same token, if you get it on the outside, you're going to have some resin stuck to the outside of the restoration. So you should, if you don't have it, you should have some type of hydrofluoric acid in the office. On the off chance the lab didn't etch it properly, you're going to have to do it yourself. Now, I throw this slide in. This is from Bisco. This is their porcelain etchant. It's a 9.5% hydrofluoric, and it obviously will allow you to etch both lithium disilicates and feldspathic and or lucite if you're using any of those. Okay. So I put in literally how you would use it as far as, the steps that are involved. So you have, a cookbook recipe to refer back to. Now, the beauty of this material is that for Emax, it's irrelevant. If you used a 4.5 or 9.5 hydrofluoric, you can use it across either. Okay. But if you're going to use, let's say, feldspathic porcelain, then you typically would only use I shouldn't say only, you typically would use a 4.5% and have to etch it longer. And so again, to simplify your setup in your office, instead of having two different etchants that, one's going to go bad and you're wasting money and having to determine which one to use on which type of ceramic, that's why I made it simple and say, just get the 9.5% and you can use it on both feldspathic and on lithium disilicate, or since most people think of Emax. Okay. All right. So if you're etching things in your office, you then have to rinse things off. So for me personally, I like using a steam cleaner, works very well, but you can also stick it in a water bath if you want, ultrasonic. But for the ceramic, you'll see we're still talking ceramics. You then have to apply a silane. It's a coupling agent that allows you to adhere an organic and inorganic substance. And by applying this onto the ceramic and allowing it to sit there for, 3 minutes, you pretty much get a great bond adhesion to this ceramic. So you typically want to apply this anytime before you see the patient, or allow it to sit at least 3 minutes before you try it into the patient's mouth. Okay. That will no longer be able to be rinsed out or damaged or changed if it gets contaminated. Okay. So at minimum, you want it on there for 3 minutes. But if you get the case a day ahead of time, a week ahead of time, go ahead and paint the silane on. You can let it sit there. It'll just evaporate and, connect to the ceramic. All right. Now, as far as silanes go, a lot of different ones on the market. I'm showing you here a 2-bottle system and a single bottle system. So it doesn't matter which manufacturer you go to, you will typically find them as a 2-bottle or single bottle system. All right. So with silanes, in the case of these, I'm showing you the ones from Bisco. The rationale between why would I use a single bottle versus a double, 2-bottle system. Here's the difference. Single bottle is going to have a smaller shelf life or a shorter shelf life. It's not going to last as long. Okay. So if you're doing a ton of veneers all the time, or ceramic restorations, inlays, onlays, crowns, whatever it is, then you could use this. And obviously you don't have to worry about 2 bottles and mixing them together. Now, granted, you're saving a tiny amount of time by not having to mix, but you're just having the convenience of 1 bottle and not losing one potentially, and being able to use it and move on with your day. If you're someone who doesn't do a lot of ceramics, then a 2-bottle system is better. It's not pre-hydrolyzed. The water is separate. Okay. So you will mix 1 drop of each together to create the silane. Okay. So both work the same in the sense of how they interact with the resin and the ceramic. It's just a matter of, do you want a longer shelf life or a shorter shelf life? In other words, the evaporation of the solvent in this single bottle system is going to happen more quickly because it's already been pre-mixed, pre-hydrolyzed. The 2-bottle system has a longer shelf life because there's no evaporation of the solvent. When you mix them, you get fresh solvent, or not fresh solvent, fresh silane right then and there when you mix it. So if you want fresh every time, then get the 2-bottle system. Now, again, single bottle systems or single vial systems exist from like Premier and Sultan and many other companies, right? So in talking about ceramics, we were etching them and placing a silane. For zirconia, it's different. Your lab is typically going to sandblast them. No matter what type of zirconia you're utilizing, they're typically going to sandblast that for you. Now, if for some reason you need to sandblast it, you can have a simple one of these Danville microetchers and do the same thing in your office. And so what you're supposed to be using is 50 micron aluminum oxide at a pressure of about 40 PSI. You want to hit the inside surfaces for about 20 seconds at about a 60-degree angle, about 2 centimeters away. Basically, you're trying not to damage the zirconia. And that's why you have it at these different angles at a certain distance and a certain pressure. Okay. Very easy to do. The lab should be doing this for you. So really, you should never have to do this unless you're making something in your office. Okay. So again, trying to make things simple for you here. So you do need one. You should have one, but nonetheless, the lab should be doing it for you. So if the restorations, let's say, have been looked at, and in the case of ceramics have been silanated, the zirconia has already been sandblasted, we're ready to start trying things in and evaluating things. So again, margin placement was critical, we talked about earlier, but now the critical component is isolation. So obviously there's a lot of different ways to isolate, whether it be using an Optigate from Ivoclar, whether it's rubber dams, whether it's Mylar strips, whether it's Teflon, the saliva ejectors. There's tons of things that you can use. It's whatever works best in your hands that you feel confident and comfortable with. So when a patient comes in and they're in these beautiful provisionals and the tissues are healthy, if you want to see how I make provisionals, again, you can look at the article I wrote. There's a bunch of extra slides in your handout that show how I make mine, but nonetheless, there's a hyperlink for it. So when you take off the provisionals, as you can see here, we should have healthy, happy tissues, no bleeding, no irritation, ideally. Now, obviously, sometimes you're going to get it based on someone's hygiene, right? That's going to happen. So when it does, you have to manage that. We talked about utilizing lasers. And so if you're not using lasers, then you can use cords. Again, you can use paste, you can use the aluminum chloride, but not the ferric sulfate. Okay. Now, if I'm cleaning the tooth structure, I mentioned cleaning the tooth. I personally will go in with these Curhave OptiCleans. They're these little plastic, short, slow speed shank burrs with a little rubber coating on them that I will go across the tooth structure with my water on and my slow speed, cleaning the tooth for a couple seconds. Right? I don't go and touch the gum tissues, but I'm cleaning the tooth. Now, you could also use that microetcher we talked about earlier, but you got to be really careful with this because if you hit the gum tissues, it will start to bleed. And now you've got a big problem on your hands. Okay. But it does increase surface area, right? So if you have more surface area, you can have more glue, let's say, grabbing onto more surfaces of the tooth. So it is a nice thing to have on occasion. Now, with ceramic try-in, or even zirconia try-in, you want to try something in to evaluate, the shape, the color, contacts, the margins, the occlusion. And depending on how translucent your material is, you want to use some type of water-soluble try-in paste. Me personally, I'm using the Choice 2 from Bisco. It's what I use for all my veneers and for my crowns. It's nice because it's water-soluble. It washes away clean, right? So I'm not adding some other type of chemical into the equation. And after the patient approves the appearance and signs off on it, then we obviously have to move on. And so going back to our kind of protocol, you can see that at this point, we were at the white where we had tried it in with a water-soluble try-in gel. Having taken that out of the mouth, we now have something slightly different based on the two different types of materials we're dealing with, ceramic versus zirconia. Okay. Now, with the ceramic, since it's already been silanated, I mentioned, you can simply hit that with water, or if you want to go that extra mile and use the ceramic cleaner, that is fine too. Now, in the case of zirconia, this is where it becomes critical because this is a true contamination that you have to fix. So you're going to have to use a ceramic cleaner. And then after doing so, you then have to add a ceramic primer if you're using traditional resins so you can get adhesion from the ceramic to your resin. Okay, so for ceramics, I told you I clean it with a steam cleaner, but if you want to just sit chairside and use your air water syringe, if you've silanated it, that has protected the ceramic, you can simply rinse it off. It's quick and easy, right? So that part is easy. Hence, we have the yes at the top for the ceramic protocol. On the right for zirconia, it's not so simple. Okay, you have to add two components to it. Okay, you have a phospholipid contamination on the ceramic, the zirconia, from the saliva that cannot be rinsed away no matter how hard you try. Okay, so you have to get specific materials for zirconia to clean the inside using some type of phosphate scavenger system. So Ivoclar has their IvaClean, Carrari has their Katana cleaner, Bisco has their ZirClean. And so Zircline in particular, it's like all of them, they have their own unique chemistries, but Zircline is designed as a gel that's a non-abrasive cleaning material that allows you to pull that phospholipid off the ceramic and into this slurry and to rinse it away. Okay. They all do the same thing, but they all do it in a different manner. So you need one of them. And so again, since we're talking about these, kind of trying to keep you in a product line or category, so I'm talking about Bisco in particular here. So with the Zircline, again, you can use that on ceramics if you'd like, right? You don't have to, but you can. On zirconia, you have to use one of these things. And again, only takes a couple seconds, as you can see here, 20 seconds to clean the surface off and then to rinse it away. And then you're able to then add a ceramic primer. Okay. So a zirconia requires you to utilize a ceramic primer. Those primers typically are going to have MDP. That is a chemical that basically was synthesized by the Carrari Corporation that was in Panavia and still is, but is in a lot of Carrari products since they invented it. But when their patent fell, everyone else jumped on board and started using it also because it's a phenomenal material. So in this case, we're talking about staying within one company product line. We're talking about the Z Prime Plus, which allows you to adhere the zirconia to the resin. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, there are other ones out there, whether it's Ultradent, Denmat, Densply, GC, Carrari, many companies have them. Okay. So you can pick whichever one you want. You can mix and match. Doesn't matter. But nonetheless, trying to keep it simple for you because of the limited amount of time we have. So in the case of zirconia, we're still talking zirconia here. If the lab has sandblasted it and you've tried it in, you're then going to decontaminate with some type of, scavenger, phosphate scavenger, which I mentioned is a Zircline from Bisco. You're going to then rinse off that scavenger and apply the Z Prime Plus or a ceramic primer so that you can then adhere it to the resins. Now, if the lab didn't sandblast it for you, well, you can sandblast it before trying it in. You can do the same thing the lab would have done. Okay. Now, if you wanted to add a different step or a different approach, again, there's multiple ways to get to the same place. If you said, okay, the lab didn't sandblast it and I didn't sandblast it before I tried it in, I forgot or whatever the reason was, you can always try the restoration in. And after trying it in, you could sandblast it afterwards. And sandblasting, for the most part, should remove, if you've done a thorough job, should remove all the phospholipid contaminant. You probably, if you've done it extremely well, don't even need the zirconia cleanser. But I'd say, you know what? I don't ever want to risk things at this point after, spending all the time and money getting to this point. So I don't have no problem sandblasting it and then putting a little Zircline in there for some pennies, rinsing it off, and then applying the Z Prime Plus. Okay. So if we've done this to the zirconia and we've already treated our ceramic, we now have to isolate things. So whether it be, rubber dams, isolating and ligating each tooth, whether it's clamps, whether it's isolites, obtragates, you decide what it is, because nowadays with all of those different things, or using various types of things like saltropine or antihistamines to dry people out, a lot of different ways in how people approach things. But whatever you're doing, obviously you have to isolate it. Okay. I talked about how to clean the teeth, regardless of if it's a veneer or crown, all these things have to be done. Okay. If you have a tissue problem, like your margins are under the gum line, you might have to pack a cord again, might have to use hemostatic agents. You might need to use a laser. Okay? You have to have those ready and understand where problems may arise with those. In the case of a full crown, since I was showing some veneers, you might have to isolate the crown. Maybe you want to go around it with a cord. But again, not using any additional chemicals unless I absolutely need them. Could I have done this with a laser? Yes. Okay. All right. So going back at this kind of protocol here, if you're saying, all right, from here, it becomes fairly straightforward again. So again, trying to keep things simple. Left-hand side for ceramics, we're saying, okay, we can etch with either total etch, selective etch, or self-etch, same as we can do with zirconia for doing resins, right? Then we're going to apply our adhesive from whatever brand you're wanting to utilize. Obviously, follow manufacturer's directions. You got to read them. From there, we're either light curing, right? Or maybe we're not light curing. Maybe it's too thick of a film thickness that we can't cure that adhesive. That goes into the manufacturer's protocols, as well as how good you are at thinning that bonding agent, that adhesive. Okay? No matter how good you are at thinning things, if it's a thick film thickness material, it's not going to work. So again, key characteristic here is what product you're using and how is it supposed to be managed. From there, obviously, we can either apply a light cure or a dual cured resin into the restoration to then seed it onto the tooth. Okay. In the case of zirconia, I put a little asterisk next to dual cure because I think oftentimes many zirconias can be more opacious and maybe light doesn't penetrate through as well. So if you're concerned, you can always shine your light through the zirconia before ever seeding it in the mouth and see if light can penetrate through the zirconia, right? Or if you want to just hedge your bet, then use a dual cure resin. The caveat there is with that red little asterisk is that dual cure resins are going to act obviously differently than light cure. For light cure, you can mix and match bonding agents and light cured resins. You cannot mix and match dual cure resins and bonding agents typically. I will say that Bisco's All Bond Universal is said to work with all dual cured materials. Okay. Now, from there, obviously, you would then cure or tack cure or allow it to self-cure and then clean things up. So let's run through some of this for a moment and point out some more areas that can happen as far as mistakes or errors. Few different etchants on the market, obviously. I'm pointing this one out because this has an active ingredient that most etchants don't have. This has benzalkonium chloride. This actually kills bacteria. Typical phosphoric acid does not kill bacteria. So having, to hedge your bet and say, well, if I'm going to etch the tooth, I'm going to add something in that kills, some more bugs in case any are there that I can't see. Now, me personally, I like something a little more runny because I'm going to total etch the whole surface. If you have a specific case or you like doing specifically etching enamel only, that's great. Again, self-etch, total etch, or a selective etch, whatever way you want to work things. But nonetheless, they do make a thicker version. Obviously, they're HV, which does also have benzalkonium chloride, which will kill bugs. Okay. So depending on how you want to isolate and how you want to etch, I leave it totally up to you, but understand there are different etchants out there. Most of them don't have something that kills bugs. These do. So whether it's the whole tooth you're covering or specific areas of the enamel you're covering, you decide where or how you're going to etch that. Now, knowing this, you're then going to grab your favorite bonding agent. Now, here's where things get interesting. Every bonding agent is different in how easy it is to apply and create a bond. You'd never know how easy each one is unless you do bond strength studies. Anyone that tells you that certain brand is better than the other is not true. And here's why. Because I don't care if you've got the bonding agent that creates the best possible bond strength anywhere, anytime, and you're using, let's say, a different bonding system that has lower bond strength capabilities. That doesn't matter because those are theoretical numbers. Because we as dentists have no idea what we're capable of achieving on any given day on any patient. Now, that being said, I've seen dentists take a very good bonding agent and literally get 2 megapascals of bond strength. And I've seen another dentist get like 90 megapascals. There's a huge variation in technique. And so knowing that technique is the biggest issue, because all of these can bond, granted, some have higher bond capabilities if one makes them perform. And so here's where problems arise. Number one, don't put the bonding agent out onto the mixing well until you're ready to actually use it. I see some assistants putting it out early, minutes early. And so it's evaporating, it's changing its chemistry. You might have more sensitivity. You might not get as deep of penetration into the tooth. These are all setting you up for problems. Okay. Now, if you are applying a bonding agent to a tooth, this is not where you want to be frugal and try and put one little drop and spread it across all the teeth. You want to actually apply numerous coats on here so that this bonding agent can do its magic of seeping into the tooth. And whether it's a total etch, selective etch, or self-etch, following the manufacturer's protocols of whether it's scrubbing or not scrubbing, but putting enough on there that when this bonding agent gets on the tooth and it's starting to evaporate, it's not penetrating as far. So putting on another application so it can penetrate further. Or if it goes on as a self-etch or selective etch, where it is neutralizing when it touches the tooth, putting more coats on because they're acidic, allowing that acidity to do its magic. Because as soon as you put it on there, it's starting to neutralize. So hence putting more coatings on such that you have a very moist surface that is completely and thoroughly covered and impregnated. Okay. Now, having done so, obviously about 20 seconds is spent here at least rubbing into a tooth more liquids. So if you're doing multiple teeth, it may take a little while. This is not where you want to try and rush things. Okay. Now, the reason I point out all bond universal is because it's what I've been doing my veneers for the last 25 plus years. This is my go-to for direct composite, indirect ceramics. It's my everything because it has the ability to do everything everywhere. Now, most of the time, I'd say a lot of products can't do everything everywhere. I will tell you this is one that can. There's a lot of great research behind it. One of the beauties of it is A, I have one bottle for everything. Two, I can cure it with my technique is good, such that it doesn't have a thick film thickness because of how it's made, but also because of how I apply it. If I air thin it well, I have a very thin, less than 10 micron film thickness, such that I can cure that and then apply my ceramic and resin onto the top of it. That's why I said earlier, if you're not comfortable with that, or you have too thick of a film thickness, then obviously you don't want to cure your bonding agent. But I love the flexibility of this, that I can use it with light cured and dual cured. And I mentioned earlier, I can use it with dual cured with any brand of dual cured resin cement that's out there. That's not the same for most bonding agents on the market. So be careful. That's a huge takeaway. So here you can see I'm putting multiple coats on. You can see how it's really runny, a lot of material on there. And then when I air thin that to evaporate off the volatile solvents, I have a nice thin kind of sheen to it. There's no pooling. It's at this point, because of its low film thickness and how I applied it, I can have my light cure it. Okay. If you're not confident or comfortable with this part, don't do it because your restoration may not seat. Okay. But it's shown in research that you do get a little better adhesion to the tooth if you have the ability to bond the resin to the tooth before applying the luting resin and your ceramic. Okay, now as far as my direct, I should say not direct, but my light curable resins, I'm using the Choice 2 veneer cement. So if you've listened to some of my veneer lectures here on Viva, you'll notice I use that for all of my veneers. Granted, I try everyone else's product, but this is my go-to for 98% of the time. Reason I use this, I like the handling, I like the color. It's not too tacky, has very good color stability. Okay, and so for all those different reasons, it's why I implement that. So not to say it's the only product out there. Again, I like to share, a lot of products. I've used all of them. I have my favorite for a reason. It works great in my hands and I'm comfortable with it. Right. But like Dentsply, Ivoclar, Kerr, 3M, they all have great products. It's what you like in your hands. And if you make the technique work, any of these can be, like great restorations. All right. But it's all about our technique. And the more you do research side by side with your colleagues, the more you see how much variation there is in every one of our techniques, which makes a huge difference as far as bond strengths and longevity. Hence, we're talking about these little tiny details that make a big difference. All right, so if we're trying in, we're still talking about ceramics right now. If we're trying in the ceramic, or I should say trying in, my apologies. If we're placing our ceramic with the resin luting cement, you can see we've got a bunch of excess here. A low film thickness allows me to seat these easily, right? And then it's a matter of obviously tacking these in place or curing the whole thing, depending on how you want to clean things up, you get to decide. But obviously, light curable material makes it quick and easy, and we can get some great looking restorations. Now, if we're doing zirconia, we could have done the same thing we talked about earlier, right? If we had the ceramic primer on there, we could simply apply in the same fashion, bonding agent to the tooth, followed by the light cured resin luting cement into our crown or veneer that's made of zirconia if my light can pass through it. If it can't, then I have to move to a dual cure resin. Okay. So in the case of a dual cure resin, this is again, critical component. If you're going to use a dual cure resin, I would always stay within the manufacturer's bonding agent and their dual cure resin because of the acidity and chemistry to make sure they perform together. You do not want to mix and match unless you're using the Bisco All Bond Universal. That would be the only time that I know you can mix and match a dual cure bonding agent with a resin adhesive bonding agent. Okay. Big takeaway there. But the easiest thing is just always stay within any particular manufacturer's products and you won't have an issue. Okay. But this kit obviously comes with everything you need if you're doing zirconia, as far as your bonding agent, right? And your ceramic primer and your dual cured resin. But as I mentioned, there are other products out there. Panavia is phenomenal. I've used theirs for many years. I love their product. I've spoken on their product. I still have it. They've got a great veneer cement also. Ivoclar, I've been using theirs. Love their stuff too. GC's got their Link Force. 3M has their RelyX line. I mean, everyone's got great products. It depends on if you enjoy the way they handle and you like the way they work in your hands and the technique is consistent with you, that you're not getting sensitivity or failures. Because like I said, some systems just work better in certain dentists' hands. It's amazing to see. So if you're doing like a ceramic, full coverage ceramic crown and you can't get light through it, then you have to go to one of these dual cure resins. So in the case of that, you saw this crown earlier, we weren't sure that we were going to get light through it. So we went ahead and used a dual cure resin. So the Dual Link from Visco. So kind of looking at a summary here, a summary slide, obviously nice to see things. Again, zirconia cementation protocol. You're going to obviously clean the zirconia with that Zirclean or zirconia cleanser. You're then going to place a ceramic primer. In this case, we talked about the Z Prime Plus, right? You're then going to place your adhesive on the tooth and light curing that. You're then going to place your dual cure or light cured resin, if possible, inside your crown and seat or veneer or restoration, seat things in place, wipe off gross excess, and then, tack cure it or cure the margins or allow it to self cure, right? So again, trying to make it so it's very systematic and simple, and where you can see where there's just some subtle differences to make life easy. Let's talk about one last product. As far as, some people saying, well, I got great retention. Do I have to go through all these steps? Can it not be faster and easier? I'm on time constraints or whatnot. Well, that's why, many manufacturers have come out with various types of self-etch, dual barrel syringes of, self-hardening dual cure resin cements. And so if you're thinking of that kind of line, okay, well, the Theracem, obviously, let's walk through one of these real quick. You can obviously try in your restoration. If your zirconia is tried in the mouth, it's going to be contaminated. Well, how do we fix that? Again, we clean it with some type of zirconia cleanser. From there, you go, well, then I'd have to put on a zirconia primer previously. Well, again, the majority of them nowadays, the majority of these dual cure resin cements, these kind of do everything. They have MDP primer inside the resin, such that you don't have to put a ceramic primer on the zirconia. So you can literally not put adhesion from a bottle onto the tooth and not put a primer onto the zirconia, because the dual cured self-etching materials have MDP that they can grab onto the zirconia, as well as the self-etching capabilities to grab onto the tooth. So you literally just inject this material into the crown, seat it, wipe off the gross excess, again, tack cure it or allow it to self-cure it, and you're done, quick and easy. But that's if you have a good retentive preparation design. The other beauty of it is it releases calcium and fluoride to help, potentially fight off decay and or strengthen the tooth internally. So some of these, we're starting to see more of these types of products available. So in the right instance, these can work extremely well too. All right. So again, a couple extra slides thrown in there for you for your handout, but nonetheless, the Theracem calcium silicate technology allowing you to put in crowns, bridges, inlays, onlays. So all the different types of ceramics we're talking about, if you have good retention, you can use one of these to be fast and easy. Okay. So again, I mentioned all the wonderful benefits by not having to use a primer, by having MDP. It gives you a high degree of conversion and adhesion to the ceramic, and the self-etching capabilities of the resin technology, allowing them to bond to the tooth, as well as calcium and fluoride release. And being an alkaline environment, once it's set, allows you to help, not get a cavity in these areas should there be leakage or something over time. All right, so another slide to make it simple and dummy it down. I said if you wanted to try in the zirconia and cleanse it, you could then, use the Zirclean and use the Theracem. We mentioned all that. But now to back up and say, well, hey, what if I want to use Theracem on like a really thick Emax where I've got strength because of bulk thickness and I've got good retention? Can I use Theracem there? By all means, you can. But in this case, you would have done your ceramic, your porcelain primer ahead of time. That's your silane, right? Trying it in, it's then basically just rinsed off with water. We talked about that. And then you can use your Theracem to grab onto the ceramic. That's a lithium disilicate or lucite or feldspathic, and it'll grab onto the tooth. So you go, wow, that's a fast way also. So yeah, you've got a number of different ways in which to attack these things to make your job easy and efficient. So in the case of, zirconia, again, silane is contraindicated, right? Tooth etching and conditioning is not necessary. Bonding agents not needed. You can literally bond in a zirconia crown with the Theracem without having to jump through all those hurdles and steps, which again, makes life fast and easy. And so in seeing that, you go, okay, this is great, makes life simple. And so you have some different ways to approach these now, having seen these. So hopefully now you can see that, hey, zirconia is not so tough. I just got to have the right materials and I got to make sure my technique is sound, but I have some latitude to use some different types of materials in different places. And so again, to make things easy is why I kind of line them up, because oftentimes when I'm out lecturing or talking to people, they make it sound like zirconia is so challenging to adhere to, and it's not. You can actually get phenomenal adhesion to them. We were doing adhesive studies at UCLA back in the 90s with zirconia dowels, endodontic, posts, using Panavia, which is MDP, and getting the best bonds of anything in any manufacturer product line. It was always the Panavia because it had the MDP technology. And so nowadays, having that in many of these systems is why zirconia is so easy to adhere to if you've handled it right and cleansed it right. Okay. So hopefully you've found some things that make life a little easier, maybe some materials that you might want to go out and get to again, make the job simple. Now, I mentioned there's a handout. I know we went through a ton of stuff in a short amount of time, and that's kind of how I always do things. But nonetheless, since it's probably somewhat like, wow, he went through a lot, that's why I make sure you get a handout. And like I said, there's about an extra 20 slides in there of things that I knew I wasn't able to cover, but I left them in so you can go back and see them. And some of them have hyperlinks, so you can go read articles if you're someone who likes to go read those things. But nonetheless, to get a handout, go to dentools.com. That's my website, dentools.com. And when you go there, recognize, I'll show you what it is, dentools.com. If you go there, basically, this is what it looks like. And so you're going to put in your name and email. It's got my lecture schedule. It's got my social media for those of you who like to follow along and have some fun. But nonetheless, you're going to put in an email. This is all automated. I don't handle anything. So if you're like, send me my handout, like I'm not doing it. But if you have questions or something, I see them, I will respond to them usually pretty quickly. But nonetheless, this is all automated. So when you put in your email, make sure you spelled everything correctly, because it will automatically go to that email address. If for some reason you don't see it, double check you wrote things incorrectly, and double check it didn't go into your spam or junk folders. So you're going to get a hidden link. And granted, I will post the handout later today. So the handout will go up sometime tonight before midnight. I just haven't uploaded it yet. But nonetheless, when you go to that page, it'll say, hey, congratulations, you're here. And it's just a long website of different things that I use and all kinds of different handouts that I think are beneficial, that have made my life better in dentistry. But at the bottom of the page, you will have where it says right here at the bottom left, click here for a handout. Yours will say, obviously, tonight's program on Viva Learning, but you'll click that and it'll pull up a PDF of every slide I showed you. And they're all hyperlinks to all the research. But if you want to take any of the other lectures, there's probably another 30 lectures on there. Feel free to download anything and everything. Come back as often as you want. Makes no difference to me. I get nothing for this. This is me trying to make life easy for you as a dentist. The same as when I sit in the audience and I'm trying to write things down frantically, or I want a slide and I didn't get it from my camera phone. I'm just trying to make it easy on you. So hopefully that helps. You don't have a stack of papers sitting on your desk or on the floor in your office. Granted, we covered a lot, but if you like kind of my thought process and how I approach things, feel free to check out the podcast I do weekly. Totally different. Nothing you'll typically hear inside of the dental world, but I've had a lot of people say it made a big difference for them. So you might check that out. Also, my online training is known as Legion. If you want to check that out, again, we train on things that are not taught inside of dentistry that obviously have made me extremely successful. And I'm always looking at business outside of the world of dentistry and implementing things that other dentists don't implement. And that's why my programs are so unique and different, and why people that come out of my programs usually do extremely well. So you might check that out as well. With that being said, we're going to dive into questions. You can notice here my email's there if you want to contact me in the future. Feel free to reach out to me there, but also you can reach out to me on DenTools. But nonetheless, what you're learning today, if you don't implement today, it doesn't become a habit, and therefore nothing changes, and therefore that was a waste of your time. So hopefully by getting a handout and committing to doing something for you and your patients, that you can make some change to make you more successful, to work more efficient, to have less problems in your world, and to be more financially successful. Because at the end of the day, it's all about freedom and having more time to enjoy life. The way you do that is obviously through some extent money. And so being more successful allows you to have that freedom. All right, so there's a couple of questions that popped up. Let me hit a couple of these here for you. Someone asked about the laser case where I was recontouring the gum tissue. Was the crown only 21, or was it also replaced on tooth number 11? No, I only did one tooth. Yeah, single tooth dentistry, single crown. My lab technician is phenomenal. And so, yeah, you saw the final picture side by side close up. Obviously, I did a great job taking an impression, giving them enough space to work. But then it was up to them to work their magic to make some phenomenal ceramics, and for me to obviously get it glued in so it stays hopefully many, many years. But my ceramist takes the credit for that one. Let's see. Another question. Been waiting for me to activate caption. That's not on me. Everything goes into Q&A. I'm not sure what you mean by caption. You'd have to ask Viva Learning. Let's see. What else we got here? Kirk, someone wrote that Kerr claims that OptiBond extra universal bonds to all light cured, self cured, and dual cured. Do you? I'm assuming do you think that is correct compared to all universal bonding materials? No. So Kerr may have that now. At one point, they didn't. I'm assuming. Yeah, I lecture for Kerr as well, but nonetheless, if they can, that's great. If they make that claim, wonderful. My question to, I guess, any manufacturer that makes that claim, I kind of want to see their data. And that's me just being extra concerned that when someone says, hey, they can bond with their bonding agent, it's like, yeah, but is that bond strength like a 5 or is it like a 30? Where are we at? So unfortunately, I don't always take manufacturer claims for what they are. I want to dive deep and dig into the research. And so I know a lot of the researchers or a lot of people that develop materials inside of companies. And so I can go talk to them specifically. So I haven't talked to the people at Kerr about that one in particular. But again, if they make that claim, then great, go ahead and use it. But if you want to be on the safe side and not risk things, then obviously if you're using Kerr OptiBond, great product, stay within their product line like their Nexus 3 for their dual cure resin, you'll have great success. But and that's me, just if I'm not comfortable enough knowing for certain that I can use any other system out there, I'm going to stay within a product line just to not have to worry. Okay. So if they claim that, that's great. Go ahead and use it. That'd be awesome. What else? Panavia V. Use the same tooth and ceramic primer for zirconia and lithium disilicate. Is that okay? Again, this is where certain manufacturers have made things like Carrari's phenomenal. I love their stuff too. Like I said, I use their stuff as well. But if you're staying within their product and they've proven it for their product, go for it. Right? Because they've done tons of studies, especially Carrari. They do a lot of great studies, a lot of great research, a lot of great chemistry. So in that instance, yes, their ceramic primer, you can use their particular ceramic primer on zirconia, lithium disilicate, feldspathic. And I do love their brown bottle. It's their ceramic primer. Phenomenal product. I use it all the time. But that being said, not all zirconia primers can be interchanged like that. So again, this boils down to following up. If you're going to buy something, find out if it's going to do what you want. Can you use it everywhere? These are the questions you want to ask, because some people just assume like, well, hey, since Bisco does it, then Carrari does it and Kerr does it, and therefore GC must do it. And so that's not the case if you're using dual cure technologies and some of these ceramic primers. So again, just double check on those. And that's why I was saying, hey, at least at minimum, you've got a series of materials that you go, okay, if I'm using this, this, and this from Bisco, it's going to work great. If I stay with Carrari and use the ceramic primer and the Panavia V or the Panavia veneer cement, then I'm okay. That's if you're, obviously using dual cure stuff. If it's light cured, you can mix and match. So great questions. Appreciate that. Anyone else have a question for me tonight? And obviously, if you think of something after the fact, you've got my email as well as dentools.com. You can always write that one in there, and I usually get back to you within a couple hours. And if I don't have the answer, obviously I know someone at every company or researchers that I can always find the answer for you. So don't ever feel bad about asking questions. Again, that's how we learn. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions coming up. So with that being said, you have a little test to take, I think, a 5-question test. So I wish you all the best with that, best in your career. Follow me on social media. I look forward to chatting with any and all of you. Have a great night.